All right, let's break it down. So we're looking at your anatomy first, because your biomechanics is you moving through your pitch and delivery dependent on what your anatomy can perform, right? So a lot of the things we get stuck in is in our anatomy. Like our mobility is too tight. Our power isn't explosive enough. Like these start to really affect what we're trying to do in our movements, right?
Yeah.
So let's go through this first. So trunk rotation, a little tight. So what that means is if you're able to really get your hips to open at landing, you're gonna have a hard time keeping your trunk back, which is important because that's how we sequence energy. That's how we push energy up. The more we delay the in, the more time we have to push the energy to the top, right? So you're gonna have a little tightness there. Your hip abduction specifically on your right side is tight, so that's the lateral movement. And that's important because the longer I can ride laterally, the later I go into rotation. The earlier I go in rotation, the quicker I start pushing energy up. Well, I want to do that late because I want all the time I can take to build energy before I push it up, right? So you're going to be a little restricted there, meaning you're going to want to go into rotation too early. Your ankles are not bad, a little above, about average. Your hip internal rotation is tight, specifically on your right side. So that means the femur, if I'm going to swivel my hips, I have to turn my femur in. The more I turn my femur in, the more my hips swivel. So if I'm restricted there, I'm going to have a hard time rotating my pelvis, okay? Hip flexion on your left side is really good. I don't know why it's so, and that's internal. Wait, I'm not looking at it, right? No, here it is, 70, 72. So tight on flexion. So that means if you're able to get a lot of power down the mound and really push it through your trunk, which is critical because 86% of the energy that goes to the ball comes from the trunk, you're going to be restricted on how far you can push it. That's going to cut off your ability to really pump energy up. That's going to be your posterior chains not either lengthening well or strong. Hip extension, very tight. So that means if you do get a long stride, you're going to have a hard time extending your hip to get into full hip rotation. So you have a lot of things fighting hip rotation. Good speed, good rotational speed. Below average to below average. Well, I'll say average. Yeah, average below average vert. Average to below average strength. So we definitely need to get better in your explosiveness. And you can see in your wide balance is your high correlation to use the kinetic chain. Really good movements on right back movements. Your knees, your front movements are weak. So you have weak knees. So good pelvic stability, except when you move forward. Let's think. Let's see here. Same thing on your broad. So definitely need to get more explosive. Definitely need to get more mobile. Let's see what happens. So we take you at a leg lift. You want to squat straight down.
Yeah.
Remember we said you had tight hip abduction. Yeah. So maybe you're just squatting down as opposed to forward and down, because your hip abduction's tight. Because by the time you get here and you start abducting your thigh, you're already ready to land. We want to get to the point where we fall into that motion so we can spring out of that motion. You're dropping early and then shifting weight forward. It's going to be not as explosive, specifically coming off the rubber, which is the only leg on the ground.
Yeah.
So when you get to landing, you turn your knee in, but there's really nothing propelling your hips around, your back hip around. You've done a good job and you've landed closed with your front leg. That really creates a block for all your momentum to hit, which is good. But think about it. If you're trying to land closed and stable, how the heck are you going to rotate your hips if your back leg isn't driving?
Yeah.
So your back leg is not going to create a lot of energy. So if we look at what we call your kinematic sequence, this is how things are sequencing up the kinetic chain and rotation. This is foot plant, maximum external rotation, ball release. You see foot plants right here, MER, and then ball release. At foot plant, your pelvis is moving slower than your hips. We don't want that. Foot plant, we want your hips moving faster than your trunk, right? So your trunk is moving faster, even though it's barely moving, because your hips are barely moving. So really, your hips are not doing anything.
Yeah.
And if this leg's If you're just gonna go down and shift forward and turn this in, it's not gonna be that explosive. We have to fall forward and down the same rate and spring and triple extend out of that movement to propel hip rotation. Because we'd want our hips at like 300, 400 here. Watch your pelvis rotation. It's peaking. Jeez, and it's peaking fast. This is crazy fast pelvis rotation. So your pelvis rotation is all the way in at maximum external rotation, peaking super fast. But watch on the avatar, when that turns red, it's peaking. And it's right there. But also, look what's turning red with it. So your hip and shoulder are peaking together. Yeah. You don't want them peaking together. You want a sequence. You want them hips peaking, then trunk. What?
I literally just watched a video on that last night.
Right. So
insane.
Right. So exactly. So that means people don't understand hip to shoulder separation. Yeah. People think it's just positions. Like, if I lay in shoulders closed, I'm separated. No, you're just shoulders closed, which is good, but your hips aren't open, which is way better. And it's really when they peak, where are they peaking? High velocity pitchers have a larger margin between when the pelvis peaks, the trunk peaks. So if you're peaking together, you have no margin. So you're not even using hip to shoulder separation, which is a huge velocity component. So that's what you need to learn to do. And it's not that you need to learn to keep your shoulders back, it's your hips. You need to learn to get your hips open. A lot of guys go, well, they're peaking together, how do I keep my shoulders back? It's not that, your shoulders were back. It's just your hips never open, or never opened ahead of your trunk. Okay? And then pitch release. Really good front leg. Like, you stabilize your front leg well, but here's the thing. If you have a really good front leg and a really bad back leg, that means you're really good at braking but not accelerating. Yeah. So that means everything just does this. Yeah. But if I'm really good at accelerating and braking, my trunk pushes all that energy forward. Like, for example, let's look at angles first. If we look at your trunk angle at maximum external rotation, your trunk angle at maximum external rotation is not even 1 degree. You're not even barely 1 degree forward. This, so degrees would be, this is 0, this is 90. Mm-hmm. You're not even 1. An elite guy would be 45. Because that's your runway. So if I took a jet and it has to get to, say, an F-18 has to get to 165 miles an hour to get off the ground, the runway is going to determine how much time it has to do that, right? Well, if I gave him like 10 feet, what are the chances he's going to get there? So that's what you just did. You gave yourself this little runway. So, like, you can't stay in that short of a trunk distance and throw hard. It's just not going to happen. We got to push your trunk distance out here, just like the jet, and so we have more time to accelerate through it. Right? But they kind of work hand in hand. I mean, if your trunk doesn't go forward, it's because you really didn't create the acceleration of energy, because the trunk's reacting to that, right? And if you look at, like, velocity-wise on it, you are peaking your trunk speeds around that time. So I mean, it's a little late, so your trunk is stopping a little early, but you're still trying to get to your trunk peaks. You're just doing it in such a short amount of time. We need to create your distance, and that comes from the back leg. Your back leg just failed. It just turned over, created late hip power. Pretty much your front leg did everything. You just land, and your front leg was creating everything. But if my front leg creates everything, what does the front leg do? It pushes back, which can help with rotation. But studies show this powers rotation way better, and this gives you all the linear energy to the front leg. So the front leg, if it works by itself, it's just a rotator. If it supports the back leg, it becomes it supports more linear movement. So your back leg is just failing, and that's what you're going to learn here today. Now, your spin efficiency is poor, and once again, when I see guys that are very vertical, I don't see good pronation. Spin efficiency, vertical brake come from good pronation speeds. This right here. Yeah. When I see guys finishing like this doesn't happen till late. But if I see a guy pushing out here, that arm has to turn over because it's coming back across the body. When it's up here, it has all day to decelerate. So it doesn't accelerate the pronation speeds. Yeah. So as your trunk gets more forward, your lift's going to get better. So just think about that. All these great things start happening. More trunk forward, more velocity, more pronation speeds, more lift.